Today I'm going to try to draw this storefront in Tallinn, Estonia, but more specifically in the Nõmme district, which I'm surely mispronouncing. My wife and I took the day to come out here. It's only about a 20-minute drive or so from the center, and it's been really nice. There's an incredible little market with fruits and vegetables, meats and cheeses, tons of flowers. And then beyond that, there are also shops and cafes set up in buildings like the one you see here. The neighborhood has many traditional houses like the one I drew the day before yesterday. There are some ski slopes, trails through the woods, and there's even a castle, which I will hopefully get a chance to draw as well. I've never been to this part of Tallinn, but after today, I will surely return. It's been a really nice, relaxing afternoon, and I'm just happy to be out here drawing. So let's talk about that. First and foremost, I do not want a repeat of yesterday. So I'm really taking my time at the beginning here, loosely marking where I want this building to be, along with the doors and eventually the windows. The outline of the building itself is the most important part for me to get down right now because it will help inform the perspective going forward. Compared to yesterday, where I had an obvious vanishing point at the center of the composition, today's vanishing point would be somewhere far off to the left, too far to fit on the paper, so I'll need to kind of intuit these angles. I think I've drawn the building's outline accurately enough, which means I can use those lines, like the top and bottom ones, to draw in anything else that sits at the same angle, namely the doors, windows, sign, benches, you get it. As long as I can keep my eye level in mind, I'll know which lines sit perfectly straight, and if I can visualize where certain components lie against others by, let's say, eyeballing the top of the door to the start of the roof, I can slowly start to build off of that throughout the rest of the drawing. With every new shape I manage to add, I'm building this kind of contextual map. The more points I can plot, the more proportions I can get right, the better my chances of achieving an overall accurate picture, prospectively and proportionally, that is. Also, at this stage, I'm using lighter lines because of the exploratory nature of the drawing. Something like proportion is a pretty hard thing for me to grasp seamlessly. So I found that taking my time through this portion of a drawing is imperative if I want it to look reasonably realistic. I'm not going for a perfect reproduction of the reference, but I think it would be disingenuous of me to act as though I'm making a bunch of what amount to proportional mistakes for, quote, art's sake, when it's actually just a question of skill. I've heard people talk about how someone like Picasso was technically proficient and then subsequently moved into the more esoteric stuff. And that makes so much sense to me. It's like understanding the rules, so you better understand how to break them. I don't want to be loose or simplistic or whatever with my drawings just because it's all that I'm capable of. I want to understand how to draw what's in front of me, and I can radically alter it to my taste afterward if I so choose. But to be honest, I'm way out of my depth in this conversation right now, especially regarding Picasso. So I'll stop before I dig myself into an even deeper hole. But I think you get what I mean. Okay, so while I was saying all of that, you may have noticed me drawing the bicycle. I'm pretty content with the way it's looking, and candidly, that comes from my low expectations. And I actually don't mean that in a negative way. It's just what I wanted from the drawing. I knew going into this one that I wouldn't waste much time on these smaller things, even though those things are the things that initially drew me in. Of course, the context of the storefront is hugely important, but these objects, the bicycle as well as the potted plant, make the scene what it is for me. Even so, I didn't want to lose myself in the details. Instead, I was hoping to kind of shut my brain off as much as I could, chasing these general shapes and, kind of hoping that they're correct. I want the proportions, which apparently is a hot topic today, to be close enough to reality without fussing with the specifics, which is also how I tend to approach foliage, especially if it's not front and center. I can always go back and add in some of the smaller details, especially with the bike. But my primary concern here was getting the ratio of the wheels to the frame good enough, which I think I achieved. So, thanks to some of my recent YouTube rabbit holes, and this in and of itself will be a rabbit hole, I'm realizing just how many lines people tend to draw within their doors and windows, and most notably, how they really don't need to be all that specific. And I will elaborate. I have been vastly overthinking them, which I have been aware of, but it's something I haven't really understood how to shake. I'm always getting caught up in either exactly how many lines make up a door frame, or I'm ignoring that, and yet my idea in my head of the door frame is still overly complicated. So in practice, I have like the same problem. Hopefully that is making sense. Having watched a few artists draw their own doors and windows, among other things, I can see how casually they go about them, and how by adding another line after another line, they're not adding precise detail to the door, and we'll stick to the door for now. They're often adding just like this implication of detail, but also, and way more significantly for me, in doing that, they're adding the framework for depth. And this is something I've really struggled with. So for example, when I usually draw a door, I envision one long, tall rectangle, a doorknob, maybe some squares for windows, as I'm sure we all do. Maybe it's flush with the wall, in which case the initial rectangle will suffice, or maybe it's set into the wall, which if so, I'll need to draw depth. If that was the case, I would struggle my way through the process of marking down one plane after another plane, intent on representing the inner part of the door frame exactly as I see it. Even if I'm going for a vague drawing, I still get caught up in this process. And unfortunately, this causes two big problems. The first is that this takes a long time and a lot of unnecessary brain power. And the second is that by paying so much attention to it, I would overdraw it. And I'm not sure why I'm speaking in past tense, because this is still very much an issue, but at least I'm noticing the breadcrumbs. I'll find my way out of here eventually. So yeah, by focusing so intently, I would make, let's say the inside of the door frame, which actually in this you can see a sliver of on the right side, I would make it stand out way too much, and all of that effort would be for naught. But getting to see all of these competent artists just rip their way through stuff like this, drawing a few vertical lines followed by one or two correctly angled horizontal ones, really opens my eyes. And while this drawing is no shining exemplar of that, I felt myself relaxing into that idea a little bit today, and I really hope I can dive all the way in. Also, while we're on the topic, a similar concept applies to windows. Windows, as you know, have been a bit of a thorn in my side lately, and I'm eager to pull it out. So in the same vein as the doorways not needing to be these emblems of precision, I've decided to treat windows the same way. I've noticed that I'm always concerned with keeping each line or space unencumbered by any other, for instance, trying to avoid any overlap. But I'm realizing how unimportant that really is. Once again, proportion. It's immensely more significant. Rather than use one dark line to signify the window frames, which I really don't like doing, or by using empty space to represent them, which ends up taking a lot of time and invariably makes a mess of everything, notably the shapes of the windows themselves. They get a little weird. Instead, I can just draw two parallel lines and hold on to your hat. The space between them is the frame. There are probably a bunch of reasons I haven't done this, but one of them is that I just don't want those lines to overlap, which I now realize for a drawing like this one is kind of a backwards way of thinking. And if stuff like this sounds obvious or over-explained, I guess congratulations. Because none of this has come easily to me. I am one to overthink things, but usually that just means paying, I don't know, excessive attention to trivial things. So if it sounds like I'm overcomplicating the obvious, it's not my intention, it's just how I'm working through the ideas. Also, please remember that none of this at all is meant to be educational. As I make my way into the finishing touches, like the foliage and the questionable shading, which I might get back to, I'm happy to notice that what happens on screen, maybe not happy to notice, I'm interested to notice that what happens on screen matches my expectations. What I mean is that in the video on the right, the one we're watching together, I'm moving from one thing to another in the same order that I want myself to from the outside perspective. I hope this doesn't get too confusing. So when past me is finishing up with drawing X thing in the video, present me, the me that's watching the video, is thinking that the next thing I would draw would be Y thing. And then as I'm watching the video, past me does just that. So in the past, I end up drawing what future me will have an urge for me to draw next. If any of this is making sense, you're probably thinking, well, duh. You are past you and you are present you. Of course you'd make the same decisions. But I'm not so sure. I've mentioned it before, but from the drawing perspective, I'm not in the same headspace as I am when I stop drawing. So when I'm watching myself draw, I'm in a much different position, seeing everything from a much different perspective and state of mind. And yet the drawing somehow follows the flow I would expect it to. I don't know what that says, if it says anything or if there's any takeaway whatsoever. But yeah, I find it pretty interesting. And then from that, I wonder if that happens to you. As you watch me draw, as you are following along with the video, as I hope you're doing, you better not be skipping to this point or to the very end. Do I end up drawing next what you expect me to draw next? Or not expect me to, but maybe what you would expect yourself to if you were the one drawing. I'd love to hear whether or not that's the case. I imagine everyone has a different flow or different priorities, so I'd actually be pretty surprised if it was the same. But yeah, let me know regardless. A decent example of this would be, like, I think at some point I was drawing the right doorway or the right windows or something, and then I would seemingly randomly bounce to the left doorway and shade in the inner part of that room. And I guess in some ways that doesn't really make sense because it's sort of bouncing around the drawing, but in my brain as I watch this, that's the same decision I made now. So I wonder why that is. Anyway, probably not important. Okay, so I kind of like this one. The perspective of the ground, like the actual floor material, is completely wrong. And I realized it pretty much immediately. And the foliage is a little much. I wish I kept it vague. And the shading is reminiscent of the day before yesterday with the yellow building's overhanging roof. However, in this one, I remembered that and I wanted to make it a little bit less jarring. So I lightly, messily darkened a lot more of the storefront. There's also a lot more to do with regard to finishing, like rendering things out. But yeah, this looks like progress to me, and that's all I can ask for. So what do you think? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, as well as your whole opinion about the order of operations thing. And please don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate you for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.